I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
And we are two Shakespeare nerds who decided to make a podcast about our love for Shakespeare.
In this podcast, we will tackle as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which it was written, and how the text is viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as actors, how his plays can be responsibly performed today.
All while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to bardolatry. So, Shakespeare Anyone? Hi, listeners. Elyse here to remind you of all the ways you can support the podcast and the work that Courtney and I do. First up, we have a Patreon. Our Patreon patrons receive exclusive bonus content. Every month we do a roundup of Shakespeare-related content we have found online. We also share Patreon-exclusive bonus episodes of the podcast. These look like extended versions of episodes you've heard here, collaborations with other Shakespeare podcasters, and Courtney and I doing reviews of Shakespeare-adjacent media, like TV shows, movies, and books that are inspired by or loosely based on Shakespeare and Shakespeare plays. Patreon patrons also receive snail mail from the podcast, and some levels even vote on future episodes of our podcast. If you are interested in checking out our Patreon, or just the Shakespeare-related names we've given the tiers of support, head to patreon.com/Shakespeare Anyone. The link is also in our episode description. After you've done that, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your review might even make it on an episode. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and tell a friend. Word of mouth is our best form of advertising. Thank you so much for all of the support you give the podcast. Now, on to the episode. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Elyse. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you?
I'm also doing pretty well. It was actually a gray, overcast day in Los Angeles.
Yes, also in Sacramento, we had a little rain, which was so lovely. It's been like 100 degrees here for months, so it was so nice to have some rain. But, you know, it's also
a little like spooky season.
Starting to feel like spooky season, but also like, I don't know about you, but like sometimes I just feel a little tired because I just want to be like cozy. Yeah.
Yeah, same.
But I'm really excited today. We are wrapping up our time with Much Ado About Nothing, and that we had so many Much Ado's to choose from. We also have some exciting news about our Patreon to share with listeners. Yes. So our Patreon, we are now offering exclusive merch for our Patreon patrons at tiers $5 and up. Each tier gets a sticker, and then tiers $10 and above also get something a little extra. Mm-hmm. So super excited. This is something that we've been wanting to offer for a while. And Patreon patrons receive their merch after 3 months of support. That's a Patreon thing, not an us thing.
Yeah.
So very excited to now offer that. Also, as I said, so many Much Ado About Nothings to choose from, including a loose adaptation that came out this year.
Loose, yeah.
called Anyone But You, which stars Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. And we are talking about that over on our Patreon. And that is available for all of our patrons, as well as if you just want to check out what sort of things we've been creating for our patrons all this time, we are making this one available to purchase as a one-off. So if you just want to check out that one episode, give it a try. And if you like what you see there, or you want some of the merch, join our Patreon.
Yes. And in addition, we are listener supported. We are independent podcast producers, and all of that is thanks to our Patreon community. If you want to support us and keep this podcast ad-free and keep us caffeinated and support our research, then you can also go to Patreon in order to help support the work that we do.
Yeah. And now let's talk Much Ado About Nothing.
Let's do it.
All right. So now let's dive into talking about the adaptations of Much Ado About Nothing that we watched. So we watched the 1993 film starring Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson, as well as a host of other celebrities performing Shakespeare. We also watched the 2019 production from the Public Theater, which was directed by Kenny Leon and featured Danielle Brooks from Orange is the New Black, as well as Grantham Coleman. And then we are also going to talk about the 2011 production from Wyndham's Theatre in London that featured David Tennant and Catherine Tate. So we're going to go through each one by one. And then at the end, we're going to do something a little bit different, a little bit fun, and talk about what pieces we would keep from each one to build our best version of Much Ado.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Cobble some pieces together. And if there's a Much Ado that you wish we had covered and we didn't, please join us at Patreon and give us a suggestion. We take our Patreon patrons' suggestions for our bonus audio. So if there's one that you're like, I wish you had done Joss Whedon's or this one or that one, let us know over at Patreon.
There were so many to choose from. So yes.
Too many.
Again. And now let's dive in to talking about the Kenneth Branagh movie of Much Ado About Nothing. This is directed by Kenneth Branagh, adapted for the screen by Kenneth Branagh. It stars Kenneth Branagh. It's a lot like the Hamlet in terms of credits.
Yeah.
It also features, I'll just really quickly run down the cast. Emma Thompson as Beatrice. Kenneth Branagh as Benedict. Keanu Reeves is Don John. Kate Beckinsale is Hero. Imelda Staunton is Margaret. Brian Blessed is Antonio. Denzel Washington is Don Pedro. Robert Sean Leonard is Claudio. And Michael Keaton is Dogberry, among others. So lots of recognizable faces in this one.
Very star-studded.
Yes.
Yeah. And this Much Ado is very Italian. It filmed on location in Italy somewhere. I didn't look up the location, but it's very clearly shot on location. I know this because there were so many red English faces in a Mediterranean climate.
Like, oh, so many people were getting sunburnt and
yeah. But it was beautiful. One of the things I really love about this movie is the location, the setting, the costuming. It's such an idyllic Much Ado.
Yes, it's visually very beautiful. And I have I'm going to start off by saying that I have a lot of nostalgia for this one. I think because the first time that I saw this, I was in high school, I think, and it was one of the first times that I saw Shakespeare done really well on screen, or in my experience, it was the best Shakespeare I'd seen on screen so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of nostalgia. I have a lot of appreciation for this one. And yeah, it's beautiful. And even today, I think that after rewatching it, I think that Emma Thompson makes this film in so many ways. She's brilliant.
Yes, I wrote in my notes, Beatrice was excellent. My favorite part of this.
Yes. I want more of this 90s Branagh budget Shakespeare, but I want more diverse people making it, not just Branagh in that sense.
Yeah.
And then rewatching it now, that's just an older, more knowledgeable person. I'm like, it's still good, but I have a few critiques and qualms, many of which I would say also apply to Branagh's Hamlet.
Yeah.
And maybe now having seen the Hamlet, I'm like, okay, I see some of the same things in this that bugged me way more in Hamlet, but I see you making some of the same choices or not choices.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you in terms of I want two things. I want more high school Shakespeare rom-coms, and I want more Branagh, period piece Shakespeare's. But I also want there to be a clear divide between actor-director, just for clarity, just for vision. It was the same thing for me with a lot of the Hamlet stuff, where I wonder if choices would have been different had those two hats been worn by two different people.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those things.
Yes. I mean, some of it is the cinematography, the grandness of certain moments. There's a montage of Benedict and Beatrice after they've both had the trick scene. I was like, this goes on for a bit of them laughing, and she's on a swing laughing, and he's dancing in
the fountain.
And it feels like an act break, but in a film where there's no such thing as an act break. And so I was like, this also feels very reminiscent of
in Hamlet when he's with the zoom out.
Yes. That's what I mean. I was like, oh wow, same sort of choice. Or a lot of walking and talking through scenes. Which I
Hmm.
mean, sure, you're shooting on location, you've got the space to do it. Sure, do it. But also another thing, there were a few times where I was like, that wasn't like at the strongest. That was something that like maybe played well on a stage, but there's a moment right at the top of that tricking scene, the noting of Benedict and Beatrice, right? Where Benedict comes out with like a chair and he like has
Yeah,
trouble with it and he just like has trouble with it for 2 seconds and then like throws it down. And I could play differently on stage,
on a
but
stage. Yeah.
I either needed more of you struggling with it or I needed less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that this has in common with Hamlet is some unfortunate violence against women.
Yeah. And I think we can put a pin in that and maybe go
Yeah.
through some top to bottom ideas because I also had a
Okay.
problem. Yeah. So, one thing that I really liked about this film was I really liked that the film really implied that a hero already is interested in Claudio
Oh,
and
yes.
and so it wasn't just like this love at first sight, like the two of them had history. And I also liked that this film implied that everyone in the party is aware of Benedict and Beatrice's merry war. I really liked that it was like established that these couples have prior relationships.
Yes, that like Hero and Claudio have like interacted before and we know that they like each
Hmm.
other.
Yes.
They do a good job of Benedict and Beatrice knowing each other already as well and establishing that there's some sort of history here, even though we don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very strong. I also think that Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh did have really strong chemistry. But I will say, I wish that Benedict had a stronger arc from being not the ideal courtier to us going back to the Book of the Courtier,
Hmm.
being like a stronger courtier.
Yeah,
I feel like his growth as a character was the weakest.
yes, I would agree. And I felt like at the beginning he was a jerk, for lack of a better word. And I don't feel like we saw him change from, not even like Book of the Courtier, but like a basic change of Benedict, realizing that he is loved and thinking that he is loved by the woman he loves, and having that like sort of change to him. Like it all seemed very cerebral. And there didn't seem to be this like it wasn't as strong as some of the other flips of that character I've seen, from
Yeah.
a guy who's a jerk to somebody who is actually not that, and that was all a facade and a disguise. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are my thoughts on Branagh's Benedict. Unfortunately, similar to Hamlet, I had some problems with his Hamlet. He knows how to say the language well, but
Yes,
yeah,
clearly like Shakespeare.
yes.
But
But
yeah, the like actual like objectives and character arc, which is in the play that Shakespeare wrote, kind of doesn't quite hit all the marks.
yeah, yeah. I do want to say that my one of my least favorite parts of this movie was the watch.
Mm,
I actually really like guttural, like in my gut didn't like the watch. Like I had a very visceral reaction to this watch. And I think it's because the way that Michael Keaton played Dogberry reminded me of Beetlejuice. And I think Beetlejuice is gross. I loved the movie.
but the character
Yeah. But the
is
character is very gross. And I think that Dogberry is a much kinder, more well-intentioned man.
mhm.
And this watch, based on the character, the costuming, the character, like the direction, I'm assuming it's direction, it felt very like punching down at the lower class.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about other portrayals of Dogberry later, but I think that this one really doesn't play to the height of Dogberry's intelligence, whatever the height of Dogberry's intelligence is. And it really feels like what we talked about in the Comic Constable of like, well, lower class equals stupid, uneducated equals stupid. And it's like, no, no. Or the malapropisms mean stupid. And we've talked about like, no, that's not necessarily, you know, you can have that in there. You can have malaprops in there and play it and make different choices. It does feel like Brana doesn't really know what to do with the comedy and like what makes this funny, because they're not so funny.
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
like there's a few actors here who, knowing their work, I mean, again, we've got 30 years, 20, 30 years, 30 years, well, 30 years out, knowing some of these careers since then and knowing what some of these people are capable of.
there's some like rearranging of roles that I would have loved to see, because I also have a really hard time with Keanu as Don John,
Yeah, same.
because I'm just like, he could be a Claudio. Like, he's so babyface.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that you said, because I also was like, Dogberry feels like Beetlejuice. It feels like similar choices.
Yes.
And in the same way, I think there's a few other actors in here who are basically playing these Shakespeare characters as roles that they've played before. So, Keanu, this is pre-Matrix, and he's playing broody teens, and here's a broody Don John.
Yeah.
And then Robert Sean Leonard, this is a few years after Dead Poets Society, and it feels like he's playing the same character that he played in Dead Poets Society. And I actually wrote, I was like, I wonder if like Keanu was Claudio, and then Michael Keaton was Don John, and maybe Robert Sean Leonard could have been a funny Dogberry, or like somehow moving them around would have been more fun.
Yeah.
But again, that's also knowing 30 years of their body of work now.
That's true.
Yeah.
There was some either misdirection or miscasting.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that like his malapropisms, I mean, are actually funny, first and foremost. We lost those. I lost those. But also just that it was like kinder to Dogberry. So
Yeah.
But maybe you're right. Maybe like recasting, shifting things around would have like been the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's also just like not the only one who seems a little bit like, I think, underdirected. I think it's something that we saw in Hamlet, is there are some people who do not seem to get the same attention to the script and lines, and kind of get like a very surface level, like, here's your intention for the scene. Here's what I need you to do. And It's like, well, that's not actually what it's saying. And they're doing a good job of executing probably what they were asked to do, but it feels very surface level. And we know 30 years, looking 30 years back in time, that all these actors can play other things. And so we're going, like, we know that they're better, and we want them to be better in this.
Yeah. Something more like text informed than your Keanu Reeves. Play this.
Just be brooding. Yeah.
And that's what I have until the wedding.
Okay. We should talk about the wedding scene.
We should talk about the wedding scene.
In the nicest way I can phrase it, it doesn't age well.
No. And it wasn't appropriate in 1993 either.
No. It feels very over the top, not grounded in a reality of these characters. And I wrote, it's really hard to like Claudio after watching him do that. We've talked about the Claudio problem of this is it starts with this scene, kind of hinges on this scene, and like you can't have him do so much that like we really question if Hero's going to be okay at the end.
Yeah. As a step-by-step for listeners, essentially Claudio grabs and knocks Hero down once he like accuses her of being unchaste. So he puts hands on her, and then additionally Leonardo grabs Hero by the hair and kind of drags her and like attempts to smack her at some point. So Claudio and Leonardo are both physically violent in this moment, in a scene that doesn't actually call for that. And so, like you were saying, Elyse, that it's difficult to root for Claudio or like Claudio. It's also, I don't like Leonardo at this point. And that's a lot to try to turn around and have audience members be on your side
in like an hour.
Yeah.
So this production has a decent amount of cuts in it, but even later, like you've got like maybe an hour left of the play to redeem everything and fix everything.
Yeah. And by the time Beatrice tells Benedict to kill Claudio, I'm rooting for Beatrice. I'm like, oh yeah, do it. Get him.
Oh yeah. Speaking of which, for as bad as the wedding scene is directed and acted, and like as rough as that is to watch, the Benedict Beatrice love confession kill Claudio scene, which happens immediately after, feels really excellent. Emma Thompson's acting her heart out, and she does a great job in those scenes.
Yeah.
And jumping forward, they have this really beautiful scene in the monument for Robert Sean Leonard, and I think he does a really good job in that scene. And if we did not have as violent of a wedding, I would really, really feel bad for Claudio, and really, it's like, oh man, it would get us there, but it was just too far to get back to liking Claudio again.
Yeah, especially because the woman at the window scene was more explicit than the play. It was a sex scene. And so I could see Claudio being upset and being betrayed. And the only way for this turnaround that you're talking about is if we don't have a violent Claudio who attacks Hero, who is like rooted more in like betrayal than like anger. So all of those pieces could have,
and who's been plotting to do that, who's processed this information and has planned to shame her. He's had time to think about what he's going to do at that wedding.
yeah.
And so like
it could have been more methodical and more hurt and less like bombastic or like an outburst. Yeah.
Yeah. I think really the best scenes in this movie are the ones we mentioned this earlier, but the Branagh Thompson scenes.
Yeah.
And Emma Thompson, like I'm watching for her.
Yeah.
Because she's luminous.
Same. Yeah. Yeah. So my takeaways are I love the location, the setting, the costuming. I want a return to this, a more diverse return to this. But I love this as like a framework or a backdrop for these plays. And then Emma Thompson is the it girl of this.
Yeah, agree. I also think that, you know, my like final thought on this one is all of that, and also that this movie starts with title cards about that feature "Sigh No More," the lyrics "Sigh No More" about men were deceivers ever, and it like has that up top. And I wish that the production and like the direction and like the thought of how scenes are played had more of that as an opinion. But ultimately, ring up Hollywood. Please tell them we want more of this kind of Shakespeare just done by different people.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, this one, it is good. It's not great.
Yeah. I would say
approachable.
It's approachable. I think it is a relatively decent introductory film. It's not the one if I was teaching that I would use to introduce students or like to support study. But I understand why one would, because it's not a bold film, but it's enjoyable.
It's pretty accessible in terms of like the availability of the media. So
yeah,
it's the one that was chosen when we were in school, but it's not the one that I would choose today. So
yeah, so then let's talk about some more recent adaptations.
We'll talk about the most recent one we have next, which is the Public Theater's production from 2019 that was staged at the Delacorte Theater, so Shakespeare in the Park in New York. And again, this stars Danielle Brooks as Beatrice and Grantham Coleman as Benedict. It also features Jeremy Harris as Claudio, Latifah Holder as Dogberry, Margaret Odette as Hero. So this was a free Shakespeare in the Park run at the Public Theater in May-June 2019, and directed by Kenny Leon. This is, interestingly, produced in 2019, and it was set at that point in the future of spring 2020.
Of 2020.
There's a title card that says that it's set in Aragon, Georgia. So it is in the United States, in the home of an affluent Black American family.
Yeah. In the spring of 2020.
Spring 2020, I was like, woof.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because the first time I watched this was in the isolation period. It was on like PBS, great performances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was also the first time that I watched this production, this one. And they do occasionally re-air it on PBS. So you can occasionally watch this one. But yeah, to rewatch this one now, having first encountered it in probably March or April of 2020 during isolation, man.
Yeah.
It feels like a time warp a little bit. It's very interesting. I really enjoyed it then, and I really enjoy it now, is what I will say.
Same. This is set in Georgia, and there is a banner that says Stacey Abrams 2020. And this adaptation is really rooted in the Black experience in America. And so it starts with Beatrice, Danielle Brooks, coming out on the like patio, and she's singing "What's Going On" by Marvin Gaye. And it's a song about brutality, police brutality, I believe. And then once she joins Hero, Margaret, and Ursula, the four of them start singing "America the Beautiful." And then when Don Pedro's company comes to the home, to the estate, all of the men are in a military uniform and they're holding placards. And the placards are reminiscent of the civil rights movement.
There's a suggestion that they have been on the ground protesting with a like Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. But even though that's how it starts, and then it also ends with a return to this war, fighting racism, this war against racism. Everything in between is so funny, and the tone is so delightful until, the tragedy of the story. But yeah, that's just the framing. It's lighthearted, it's fun, even though it's also like bookended by this fight against racism, this war, I guess you would say, against racism in America.
And I want to talk about that bookend later because I think it's really powerful. And it certainly was in 2019, 2020. Put a pin in that.
Yeah.
It really shows Black joy in the face of the systemic violence against Black Americans.
Yeah. So should we now jump into the joy and the laughter? And
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I will say Danielle Brooks is such a fun Beatrice. She was having fun, like she exudes joy, laughter, like playfulness.
Yeah, she's not a shrew, or she's not a version of Katerina from Taming the Shrew. She is the born to speak all mirth and no matter lady who's talked about. She is joking, she is poking fun at people, and she's doing it in a like jovial way instead of like a
not a mean-spirited way. Yeah.
And people are enjoying it.
Yes. And that really comes to light when Benedict arrives and the two of them have their merry war. And I wrote the word captivating. The two of them just at, their war of wit with each other. And rather than the mean-spirited Benedict, Beatrice, jerk and shrew, it's more like the two of them are in a roast battle. And it's very playful, jovial.
Yeah, and everybody's kind of egging them on, and they are making jokes at each other's expense, and this is something that they do, and this is something that they've done, and they are really skilled at it.
Yes. Oh, also, I think this was my favorite noting scene, like my favorite noting production.
The hiding scenes were so good, both stage productions that we're going to talk about. I think do a really great job, because what you can do with the Beatrice scene in the theater is kind of just like make it more absurd, make it more funny, make Beatrice distracting, because we've seen what Leonardo and Claudio and Don Pedro have done to Benedict, and we understand that the same thing's happening to Beatrice. So like we don't need like the audience is smart enough to be like, oh yeah, they're doing the same thing, and you can be a little bit more
camp, a
little bit more distracting. Yeah. I also this is about the time that we get at the very beginning of the noting scenes, we get a modern take on Sinomore from Balthazar, and I really enjoyed it.
I did too. The Balthazar in this one, and I think in the other stage production, I really enjoyed both Balthazars. Just the musicality. Yeah. I want to go back to Beatrice hiding.
Yes.
I am obsessed with the play with the audience that Danielle Brooks did. Benedict stayed like behind shrubs, behind columns, went up the stairs and did the very like staged, like like there's a separation between the audience and the stage. But Danielle, Beatrice, she went into the audience and had like an audience member like move and like let her sit in that audience member's seat, and then like had the audience member sit in her lap, and like was doing hiding behind audience members. It was so funny. And it was so fun. Yeah.
I also loved the reactions from Benedict and Beatrice to the noting, and how that I think that is something that I see theaters do with this scene. But I want to call it out in case you've only seen the film version, that there can be very audible moments from Benedict and Beatrice to hearing what's being said about them. And it's fun.
Yeah, because Don Pedro and his company, and then Hero and Ursula are totally aware that Benedict and Beatrice are listening. So it's okay to play with that moment.
Yeah. Benedict and Beatrice have to think they're good at hiding. No one else has to think they're good at hiding.
Exactly.
They don't need to fool anyone. Yeah.
Yes.
My next note is about Dogberry.
Mine is about Vergis being a very funny right-hand man.
Great. So let's talk about Dogberry and Vergis.
Dogberry.
Right. Now let's talk about Dogberry and Vergis. I really enjoy this Dogberry. She is, I think as far away from the Michael Keaton Dogberry that we talked about. She is playing to the height of Dogberry's intelligence. And, the costume is well ordered. It is pressed, it is professional, and you catch the malapropisms not because the actor is saying them and then kind of commenting on them to point it out, but because the other characters are going, wait, what did they just say?
Mm-hmm.
But Dogberry just sails through it because that is what Dogberry meant to say.
Dogberry is so confident.
So confident in this, and
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Yeah. I also really loved it. And then Vergis being like a hype man who is just like totally energetic and like elevating the energy, even though Dogberry is like very put together and no nonsense in a very funny way.
And then and then Vergis is all the nonsense.
Yes. So
yes.
It was a fun dynamic to see. Yeah. Next thing I think is the wedding scene for me.
The wedding scene. Yeah.
Okay.
We again have some violence where Hero is like physically thrown and Claudio puts hands on her.
Yeah.
Immediately the other female characters are like looking at her ankle. And so I think there's a suggestion that's maybe not quite caught clearly on camera that he pushed her and then she tripped, her ankle rolled. And, you know, it's not that he threw her to the ground. I don't love her being on the ground.
It's a more gray area. Yeah, I don't either.
It's a more gray area. Yeah. But you know what this scene has that I really enjoy? An angry hero.
Angry hero. That's, yep.
And a not violent Leonardo.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I've talked about this before of the mad dad problem with Lord Capulet, and like, you don't have to, and to see him just be so disappointed and deliver the "and mine I loved, and mine I cherished, and mine that I was proud on," like weeping that like she has been so deceitful is so powerful and such an interesting choice, and I love it. I love that take on Leonardo.
Same. He was so tender.
And Hero can be angry, and she is so good when she's angry.
Yes, this hero had as much agency. They gave her as much agency as the text would allow for. The text does limit, like, you can go outside of the text, but like they really allowed this hero to not be a weak hero, to be a like victim hero. So she was full of rage and she was an agent for herself. Like, I think from top to bottom. I mean, she was upset and she was going through these emotions, but she wasn't like, I don't know,
frail.
Yeah.
She was still a full human. You know, she wasn't just like completely lost without her man.
Yeah.
And instead she was somebody who, like you said, has agency and knows that she didn't do anything wrong and stand up for herself. Thank you very much. And is somebody who, you know, jumping back just a little bit, you know, like the clothes that they talk about for her, it's the underwear that she's going to wear for her wedding. And so she's also somebody who's sexual and has so much agency and is getting what she wants and then doesn't get what she wants and is righteously angry about it in a really nice way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Which then, of course, leads us excellently into Beatrice, another Beatrice, just with so much righteous anger. And so another like very strong Beatrice who at this moment, like this Claudio, I hated far less.
Yes.
But I still was rooting for Beatrice in this moment.
And I think, you know, we should want to root for Beatrice in that moment, but we shouldn't just be like, ugh. We can't be so put off by Claudio.
Yeah. And in this moment, this is also where I saw a Benedict who had a really phenomenal journey from his joking around, clowning bachelor to a ideal courtier who is taking responsibility. He really steps up. And he was still funny. It wasn't like he was just a very serious man the rest of this play. But this Benedict really took the gravity of the hero situation and his love for Beatrice and the responsibility of challenging Claudio, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, me too.
We also saw in this one, in addition, having Hero watch Claudio mourn her. And I think that it was a smart way for the audience to buy in to them rekindling in the second wedding.
Yes.
Yeah. This director allowed for Hero to see the fact that Claudio really is mourning his very bad choice. Yeah.
I like that towards the end, we actually see a reconciliation between Leonardo, Hero, and Margaret. It's not just like, and Margaret had something to do with this. It's like, Margaret's fine. Margaret didn't know. And that for me was very clear, which isn't always the case. And sometimes it comes off as, well, thank goodness Hero didn't sleep with anybody, but it's okay that Margaret did. And it's more like Margaret didn't know what she was doing. And it's less about the fact that she slept with somebody and more about she didn't know what she was doing. She was just sleeping with somebody.
Yeah. It was Don John who really was the villain.
Mm-hmm. And then the wedding scene, the dancing is really fun, really beautiful.
I love a jig at the end. It's such a return to early modern Shakespeare practices, or Elizabethan Shakespeare practices, theatrical practices.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fun and it's what the script calls for. And then it is interrupted and the men have to go back to their war and take up their signs of protest again. And I think it was really effective. And again, it was really effective when I watched it in early 2020. And I think, watching it now, still very effective in kind of foregrounding that this play ends happy, but, sometimes joy is cut short by the realities of the world that we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Publix. Yeah. So quick takeaways. I highly recommend this one. This might be one to show in classrooms because it is the most recent. It is really well done. It is really well acted. It is very clear and it may feel it's more of a casual environment of Much Ado About Nothing. Like it doesn't feel as stodgy and stiff as students might expect Shakespeare to be.
Yeah.
They have a playfulness it's that playfulness that we talked about before. It's the joy that we see. It's the dancing. It just feels so modern without completely, it
without
feels
stripping Shakespeare of like the language and the beauty and all of those like heightened elements.
Yeah. So yeah, this is one that I would recommend in the classroom.
Yeah, same. I put in my notes that I would recommend this production to young audiences. And I also really loved the bold characters, the bold choices, the comedic moments, and also the integration of like Black culture and the interpretation, adding those bookends of social commentary so that when people say like, why Shakespeare, why now? We don't want to bumper sticker Shakespeare it. Yeah. But I think this is a very effective and well done example of adding meaning.
Yes, I 1000% agree. And I think this would show students a Shakespeare that they weren't expecting to see.
Yep.
And if we believe that Shakespeare belongs to everybody, then it belongs to everybody. So.
Yes. Yes.
Now, last but not least, let's hop across the pond, as it were, and a little bit back in time.
Not with Amy Pond, but with...
For our Doctor Who fans out there.
Yes.
This is the 2011 production of Much Ado About Nothing that was filmed at Wyndham's Theatre and stars David Tennant and Catherine Tate, who Doctor Who fans may recognize as the Doctor, and Donna. We also have Sarah McRae as Hero, Adam James as Don Pedro, Elliot Levy as Don John, Tom Bateman as Claudio, John Ram as Dogberry. And this was directed by Josie Rourke. This one is also a more modern setting for Much Ado About Nothing, but it's kind of vaguely Mediterranean, I would say, but like British Mediterranean, like Brits on holiday.
Yeah, and also British Navy, 80s, 90s.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe Princess Di going out onto the boat. That famous paparazzi shot of her with her legs dangling.
Yeah. I don't know if it's clearly like 80s set, but there's definitely like 80s culture infused.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
This one I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yes.
I think, like the Public Theater, the tone was there. The tone was strong between like the comedy and the tragedy. This one did not have like social commentary, but it was just a lot of fun, super accessible. And I also think it really helped that, I think David Tennant and Catherine Tate would have done an excellent job, even if they didn't have experience together playing opposite each other in Doctor Who. But I think that their backstory
Their
really
history
helped
and their
to
chemistry.
Yeah, it really elevated this Beatrice and Benedict to me.
Yes. They have so clearly known each other for a long time. This also had my favorite delivery of the end of the, let's call it the roast battle, where other productions, he delivers his final diss, and then she's kind of left and says, you always end in a Jade's trick. I know you of old, to herself. And I really liked that she got right up in his face and said it to him. I was like, that's really fun.
Yeah.
This also had something that I did not expect to see at all, which was the inclusion of Imogen.
Ah, yeah. Yes.
Leonato's wife.
Yes.
Instead of Antonio. She took, I believe, the majority of the line of Antonio's lines.
Yes.
There were some cuts and there was some rearranging of text and reassignment of lines, but really fun to have Imogen.
Yeah, I agree. Just replacing Antonio, like switching Antonio and Imogen out was just such a clever way to ground this family, I think.
Yeah, it removed the confusion of like, wait, how is Antonio related to Beatrice? He's not her dad, he's some other uncle.
Yeah.
And, the changes to the text were actually very minimal. I think there's a difference between like, my wife has another niece or something like that. Something like that. And that was one of the major things that I was like, oh yeah, that had to change, because we had to be like, there's some other cousin that you just don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really fun to have her. And I did not expect to see that at all.
I didn't either.
So loved it. You know what else I loved?
What else did you love?
The prince in this one.
Yeah.
He was really fun. I think this one did a really good job of showing the what we talked about with the Book of the Courtier, of like the kind of boyishness and immaturity of Claudio and the prince, as well as Benedict. And it helped Benedict have the arc that he has in this one, which is a very clear arc.
Yes. Yeah. I wrote that Don Pedro is very casual and he does not seem like the authority of the company. Yeah. He seems like he's one of the boys. He's not the person that you should go to in order to, I mean, I had this epiphany between all three of these. I was like, oh, and also our work with the Book of the Courtier. I was like, oh, the reason why Claudio has Don Pedro courting Hero is not necessarily like sexist. It's because he's literally the prince.
Yes.
And like a lot of things have to go through that line.
Yeah, he's literally the senior officer. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in this production, because he was so casual, one of the boys, his authority was, I think, lacking. I don't know. I feel like there was like a blurriness in the like hierarchy of these.
See, I think that's where like the military, the Navy like uniforms came in, because it was very clear that there is rank involved no matter how they act.
Right.
And it was interesting to me, he had like 4 stripes on his shoulder, whereas, or he had 3 and they had like the next level below it. They had like 2 or 3. And so they were like equal in status. And I thought that was very helpful. And then Claudio was like 1. So
Baby Claudio. Yeah. And I guess what I mean more is like, yeah, there is that visual representation, but as far as their behavior and like him not.
Yeah. It's like a formality. It's literally a formality. It's not that he's
acting the admiral or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. He doesn't, which I actually think like helps you understand what problem Don John might have with him, especially with like this. Don John is much more orderly, seems much more orderly and much more serious.
Yeah.
And you kind of understand why he might rebel against his brother, who is in charge, but, isn't necessarily.
Doesn't behave like he's in charge, hasn't earned being in charge.
Yeah. Was just, born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did love the princes. I did love the casual prince. I thought that him being one of the bros was really helpful for Claudio and Benedict.
I agree.
This piece also has some of the best physical comedy I've ever seen in the noting scenes.
And it also helps that they had a revolving stage.
Yes. It allows them to do a lot with very little space. And I think David Tennant does a really great job of showing the impact that hearing that Beatrice loves him has on Benedict. Like, it's pretty instant and he's a very different man after that. He does a great job at playing in love and then a great job at like being serious later and like growing up.
Yeah.
This one also does a great job of being like, you know what, we showed what this noting plan is with Benedict. Let's go wild with the Beatrice one and let's have some fun. And listeners, they basically put her in a harness and have her like being lifted up into the air, throughout. So
yeah, the context for this is Hero and Ursula are talking like right next to some painters who are painting the wall, and Beatrice tries to hide under like a painting sheet, and of course Hero and Ursula see her, so then they get the painter to harness her up.
Yeah, up the walls. The exterior walls, like up the walls. So they have some sort of like lever pulley system to lift the painter who's doing the painting, and then she's basically turned into a counterweight for that painter.
Yes.
And Benedict's noting scene also takes place around the painters who are painting the exterior of this building and ends up with paint getting on him in a really fun way.
Yeah.
The party was really fun. Again, very much helped by the rotating set. But one thing that I really enjoyed was how they did the tricking of Claudio scene.
I agree.
They made this long silent scene where the audience watched Hero and Claudio at their bachelorette, stag and hen nights the night before the wedding. And I was like, this is doing such a good job at showing us the stakes of that night.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of alcohol, music, dancing, there's fog machines, lights. So mistaken identity is very understandable in this context.
Yeah, they're in a club. She's wearing a veil and somebody takes it and then gets it on Margaret. And as Margaret is having sex with Borachio.
Yep.
And I was like, this is a really clear storytelling of the moment at the window of like, it's hard for us today to understand the stakes in that moment and why is it so egregious and why is it not slut shaming? And it's like, oh, it's the betrayal. You really do understand why Claudio feels betrayed.
Yes. Just brilliant.
And then we have the wedding scene. We have the least physically violent wedding scene out of this 3.
Yeah. Claudio did push Hero.
Yes.
But I wrote it was the least violent, even though he still laid hands on her. But it was the least violent.
Yes. She didn't end up on the ground.
Yes. And Claudio's anger was self-contained for the most part.
Yes.
He did at one point like try to grab her face, I think, and then she fainted. I think that was like the excuse for her fainting or something like that. But I think this is my favorite Claudio.
Yes. I think these are my favorite choices for Claudio because I still I understood where he was coming from, what he thought he saw, why he had such a problem with it. His anger was self-contained and he was like even kind of having a hard time saying it to her. It was really helpful. Leonardo got angry, but again, he took out his anger on chairs and not dragging her by her hair. Yeah.
So I noted that he tried to like strangle her. He leaped at her. He reached at her. But yes, it's not like Branagh's taking her by the hair, dragging her along the ground.
Yeah.
Most of that anger, as you said, was like taken out on chairs.
Right. And even when same with Claudio, even when they reached for her, there were other people who were going, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
Like Leonardo is held back by others.
It's not like the enabling,
which doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
It's sometimes just like, okay, let's watch him do this and stuff like, whoa, that's not okay. You are overreacting. You're over emotional. You're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just reactionary.
Yeah.
So I also thought that this wedding scene was well done. And so was the Benedict and Beatrice confession of love scene.
Yes. I loved how much this Benedict and Beatrice utilized silence. And they also really utilized the fact that like being in love can be awkward. And sometimes you don't say things how you want to. Like Benedict was staring at Beatrice, who was so upset for so long. And there was a moment of like a very long, noticeable for stage time. There was a noticeable silence until he finally said, just like it was blurted out, I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Like it was just very funny because of how like involuntary it was for him. but it was so true.
And then with It's Not That Strange, he reacted to what he just said.
Yes.
And it felt very in the moment and spontaneous and not planned, and just two people bearing their souls to each other for the first time in however long it's been since they were last vulnerable with each other. And these are two people who are afraid of being vulnerable. And then when she says kill Claudio, and when he decides to do it, that's when, I mentioned earlier that we see him grow up. And he's a Benedict that we haven't seen before. He's no longer goofy. He is in love, and he's not the Princess Jester anymore. It's a really nice arc. David Tennant is so good in this, period.
Yeah. I also loved Catherine Tate in that scene. I wrote in my notes that Catherine Tate ate.
Mm-hmm.
It was so vulnerable, so funny, so gut-wrenching. And so I applaud this scene. I think it was very well directed, very well acted.
I think so too. We should probably talk about Dogberry for a second.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
We've got a silly Dogberry in this one,
Mm-hmm.
but again, it's somebody who's kind of playing to thinking he's doing the best, trying to do his best, which is what makes Dogberry really work. And there's some good comedy with them having like walkie-talkies or radios with the watch, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this Dogberry was in between Branagh's Beetlejuice, very vile Dogberry, and the Public Theater's very buttoned up, like very, very professional Dogberry. And he was very like working class and took his responsibilities very seriously.
It was very much a neighborhood watch. I am somebody who is volunteering my time to keep this place safe.
Yes. Yeah. This grouping of the watch really reminded me of the Rude Mechanicals.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of colorful characters, a lot of working class people doing their best, being energetic, and like just trying to keep peace and safety.
And again, this is somewhere, I think I said Mediterranean before, but maybe it's more like Iberian Peninsula, maybe Ibiza, because there is this like joke with the watch that one of them, which one is it, like Hugh Oatcake or George Sequel, who can read and write. What he can read and write is Spanish.
Yeah.
And they need somebody who speaks Spanish, and then he can't actually speak Spanish that well.
Yeah. Like Peggy Hill.
And yeah. And the sexton is a native Spanish speaker. Yeah, so it's a fun, it's definitely Brits abroad. And the watch helps flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I do want to talk about the monument scene.
So let's jump ahead. We're going to jump ahead in time, listeners.
Okay.
Sorry. I wanted to reorient us.
Yeah. So reorienting us, we kind of went back a little bit to talk about Dogberry because Dogberry's been present. So jumping back, the monument scene, I also think does a good job of trying to create empathy or pathos for Claudio, because he is, visibly very upset, and everybody leaves and he stays, and he is about to attempt suicide when Hero interrupts him, and he gets spooked, and she runs, and I think he thinks she's like, maybe he saw her ghost or something.
Yeah.
But he is about to kill himself, and then does not, and so he is very, very upset that she is dead, and very much blames himself.
And similar to the public, having Hero see Claudio actually not redeem himself, because he's not really redeeming himself, but to see him actually being affected by this and feel remorse for what he did, was very helpful in us returning to, like, us then moving into the second wedding and accepting that Hero would take Claudio in spite of that wedding scene.
Yes, agree.
And then I have two last things. One, I really enjoyed how this Beatrice and Benedict tried so hard to reject their love until the last minute, until the letters. And then the letters were like the final straw. It was like, okay, we can't try to kid ourselves anymore. And I think it was the most notable in the three that we watched, that there is still this like rejection of love up until the very end. So then Beatrice and Benedict accept that they're in love, and there's another jig. Bring it back to the tradition.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, I would also recommend that people watch this one.
Same.
It's pretty closely tied, I think, for me. the David Tennant, Catherine Tate, and the publics, like for different reasons.
Yes. Yes. I think that this uses the cleverest blocking strategies to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I really admired the directorial choices in terms of blocking. I think it was very well done, very well executed. And I thought that David and Catherine had the best chemistry, but it is a very close second with
Yes.
the public theater. It is not that those two were lacking. I think that David
You just
Tennant
have like
and
10
Catherine,
years,
yeah,
like years and years of friendship and working relationship, and knowing each other's like comedy stylings and being comedic partners is
yeah,
such a different level of chemistry than
right.
being two actors who have natural chemistry together.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
but I highly recommend this one. I mean, I think the one area where maybe I would not recommend this for a classroom is in the alcohol, drug,
Mhm.
sex on stage.
Yes. Yes.
But as far as the actual like taking scenes, you can totally take scenes from this.
Yeah. I would take like the noting scenes from both to like compare, contrast the choices. And yeah, I think you could take bits and pieces from each one. It could be comparing and contrasting could be a great way to like engage students in the idea of adaptation and the idea
Mhm.
of there's all these different things you can do with these plays on stage.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
definitely recommend.
Yeah. So, what would be our dream? What would we take from each production to create a like dream,
The ultimate
an ultimate
Much Ado.
much ado about nothing? I'm going to start with the budget of
Mhm.
Kenneth Branagh's.
Yeah, that's undeniable.
I think I would take the Dogberry and the Watch from the public.
Same.
I agree with you that I can't truly choose a Benedict and Beatrice because it's like Tennant and Tate, and then very, very close 2nd
Mhm.
is the public. I want to keep the hero from the public. I loved how
Same.
feisty she was. We also forgot to mention she slaps Claudio
Yes,
at the end,
golden.
which great.
Mhm.
I would also take from the Tennant production those extended silent scenes that the director added
Yeah.
to give greater context to what these characters are talking about happened.
Yeah. The public did have like intercut dance sequences and some songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they like set tone, but I preferred the scenes that really give us an idea of like these offstage moments.
Yeah. I think I could take the noting scene from each one, but I lean just a little bit more towards the Tennant Tate because I think that the physical comedy is so genius. And I'm just kind of
Mhm.
specifically in awe of how David Tennant works with the paint
Yeah.
and makes things look accidental. It's really great.
I think I would lean more towards the public, but only slightly
Mm-hmm.
because I adored Beatrice's reactions to everything. Like the comedy was so funny in the Tennant Tate, but you did lose a bit of Beatrice's reactions to overhearing because of the levy system.
Maybe I'd split it and do Benedict's noting scene, David Tennant's version, because of the physical comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I like that he is also dealing with like obstacles to his
Yeah.
hiding in the
Yeah.
Tennant one. And then I would take the public's hiding of Danielle Brooks, and again
Mhm.
the reactions. I really enjoyed the Prince and Don John, how they were characterized in the Tennant Tate version.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the public reminded me a lot of like the sophistication of like an Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the boyish nature, the immature nature of the Tennant Tate one really serves the dynamic between the guys.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And helps motivate Don John.
Yes.
And the Don John, I think, was just so classically kind of evil without being overdone in the Tennant Tate. I was like, yeah, I believe you are a plain dealing villain.
Yeah. I actually am pretty tied on the Don Johns. I think that both public and Tennant Tate one, I think they had a very similar performance and very
Yes.
similar motivation. But I think that the inclusion of like you're mentioning that Don Pedro makes the motivation for that Don John much more apparent.
I want to like combine their wedding scenes. I want to keep the Leonardo from the public.
Yes. He's my favorite Leonardo.
He's my favorite Leonardo. And I want the like less violent Claudio.
And I would take Imogen over Antonio.
Yes. Any other things that we would take leave?
I think that pretty well sums up, unfortunately, for the Kenneth Branagh production.
These are so much more fun.
Yeah.
And again, like the Branagh one is not bad, but in comparison, it pales to what these two do with this play and how they make it very fun and engage with the shortcomings that it has.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think that the public and Tennant Tate, as we're calling it, are much more approachable. They're fun. They're bold. They're really leaning into the comedy. And then when it's the time for tragedy, they're really opening up for those very sentimental, tragic moments. And unfortunately, I think that the Branagh production is stuck in that classical idea of how you perform Shakespeare.
Yes.
I think that that's its downfall.
Yes.
And I think that Shakespeare performance has evolved or changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're just seeing glimpses of like an older era of Shakespeare performance.
That's a great call out, is that it is an older era of Shakespeare performance. And these new productions are sort of where Shakespeare performance, what it has evolved or is evolving into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lastly, one last little thing. I'm just so thrilled that all three were good. Like, the worst we can say is, it was good, not great. So happy.
Same.
And that's Much Ado About Nothing. Thank you for listening.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Neverending Minute by Sounds Like Sander. If you would like to support us, it would help us out if you would hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it.
You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/Shakespeare Anyone.
Patreon patrons get access to exclusive bonus content throughout the year. The link is also in the episode description.
For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, follow us on Instagram at Shakespeare Anyone Pod, or Twitter at Shakespeare Anyone. For Twitter, that's Shakespeare Any and the number 1. Every other platform is spelled out like the name of the podcast.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here's a completely random Shakespeare quote for you. From Timon of Athens, Act 4, Scene 3, said by Timon. It almost turns my dangerous wild nature.